Hello, hello, freedom seekers. Oh, there he goes. Okay, I was going to say that we're joined here tonight by a special guest, and that is my cat. He always seems to gets this sense when I'm close to leaving, and that I am going to be heading back to California soon. I'm in Seattle, and my cat, he stays with my partner here, Chris, and he just seems to always pick up this energy and gets really clingy. And so he came jumping over here when I sat down here to make the video, and as soon as I started talking, then he went off. So anyway, I'm running about 3 minutes late tonight, but that's for a good cause, a good purpose. Chris, my partner, and we have been enjoying since Labor Day weekend. We got started on Labor Day weekend. We wanted to, do something that was going to be fun for us to do, and that was going to be COVID safe. And so we started to make some chocolate, and that's chocolate is comes from a bean grown in what's called the bean belt, which is 20 degrees plus or minus the equator, and so 20 degrees plus and 20 degrees minus of the equator. And it's a bean called cacao, and they pick these pods that are generally about this big and kind of pear shaped, and they come in different colors, and there's different kinds, of course, cacao beans. But then they split those pods open, and it's kind of like a cantaloupe in there. And after taking out then the fiber stuff, then well, basically they it's like kind of a cross between a cantaloupe and a pumpkin, actually. And so they just take and they pull out, they scoop out and they hollow out all the beans and all the liquid and fiber and all the stuff that goes around that. And they put it in these bins and then they ferment it. And the fermentation process then literally eats away and melts off all the fiber that sits around those beans and all the liquid. And so once that fermentation, and I guess it's about not quite a week it takes to ferment the beans. But once that process then is complete, then they dry the beans. In most places, they just put the beans out. Thanks for joining us. I'm talking a little bit about chocolate making, and we're just kind of waiting with the first 5 minutes or so. Wait for people to kind of come in and join us. And if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and comment with your questions. But yeah, Chris and I have been my partner here in Seattle. We've been making some chocolate since Labor Day weekend from the bean. And the beans then, I was just describing the process that they are then dried, fermented, and then they're dried. And they're dried in many different ways, depending upon, how poor or how rich the place is. Some of the best places will have slabs of concrete because they have to dry for like 20 days. Other places, they'll put down just burlap bags on the dirt, and they'll then put the beans down on the burlap bags. And they have to go through and they rake these beans like 3, 4 times a day. They rake them to turn them and keep them stirred so that they dry evenly. And so that once the beans are dried, then they bag them up, and then they're shipped off to the various places in the world, and which then that's where I buy my cacao beans from a supplier, several different suppliers that I do business with. And so right now we have been making chocolate from beans that come from Peru, and also beans that come from the Philippines. And so there's many steps along the way of making chocolate. You turn those beans, we roast the beans, and after we roast the beans, we've got to break them into small chunks. It's called cracking. And then we have to winnow them, and that takes and removes all the skins out of them. And then what you have is what's called cocoa nibs. And from the cocoa nibs, then we take and put them in a machine called a conching machine, and run that for 24 or more hours. We've now done 3 batches where we've conched 3 batches of beans from Peru. We're going to start doing a big batch tomorrow of beans from the Philippines. And the conch takes these beans. So just a moment, let me just go and grab some real quick. There we go. This is the batch that we're going to start tomorrow. and we're going to take and turn these. These are the cocoa nibs at this point, and we're going to turn these nibs into they're like particles like nuts, like grape nuts almost. And when you, but they're full of cacao. The bean has a lot of fat in it, and that's then what basically ends up making this chocolate mass. And that we take that and run it through. It's like a milling machine, but for 24 hours, like how they used to mill grains with this wheel, granite wheels, and we do that for 24 to 48 hours. And not going into too much detail, but that turns it into this beautiful, lovely chocolate mass. You can eat it just like that. It's delicious. Um, but then the next step, though, is where we turn that into chocolate bars, and you have to temper it to get that hardness. Otherwise, it's kind of soft, and so it's kind of fudgy, in fact. But you temper it, and there's a process you go through to do that, and it changes the crystals in the chocolate. And I'll be coming out with a video on a lot of this, and so you can look forward to that. But then after you temper it, then you put it into molds, and that makes the chocolate bars, and they're hard and crisp and delicious. And this will be a 75% cacao. Whereas when you buy a Hershey's bar, it's somewhere between standard chocolate's between 5 and 10%. That's why I have to call it chocolate candy. It's not real chocolate. It has so little chocolate in it. The law says if it doesn't have 11% or more real chocolate in it, you have to call it candy, and chocolate flavored candy and things like that. And so this will be real chocolate, and so it's just kind of a hobby I have and enjoy doing with Chris, and so we are busy making chocolate here, and so I ran just a little bit late getting started on this video tonight, but I'm here, and it looks like it's time to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to, last week, I went back and listened to the video that I made last week, and I watched the video, and a third of the way through, it totally lost sound. So I don't know what the problem was. I was using my headphones, and decided, in fact, I bought a new Bluetooth for my cell phone this week, and it happens to also hook in with my Bluetooth here on my computer. So I'm using that for a microphone tonight then, and hopefully then the sound will be not a problem. But we're going to go through. I've got some great material to cover tonight. But we're going to talk about building trust. And so let me go ahead and switch my screen over to my notes, and that way I can stay on track and we can get started with the topic for tonight and relate that with what you may be doing in your relationship, and what I am doing in um, my trans my transformation or my transition into an income that's all online, and that uh, it's all part of the process of liberation. And that is that we go through a three-part process, and the first part is kind of where it deals with your reframing what goes on up here in your thoughts. And after you reframe your thoughts, then the second process is the transformation that takes place, and the third process is liberation. And so I'm going to be talking tonight then about building trust, and uh, let's go ahead and get this show on the road then. And so this is my weekly wrap-up video report, and where I talk about how to transition and thrive in an ethically and consensually non-monogamous life that you create and love the most. We want you to have more sex with more people and more often. I hope you want that too. But more importantly, I also talk about creating a magnetic life, a magnetic elf life. An elf life is an easy, liberated, and fun. There's many ways you can create a magnetic life, and but I really like this idea of having an elf life, which is then easy, it's liberated and fun. And I hope that that's something that you want as well. And with that elf life comes more satisfaction and more pleasure. In fact, that's then the test that we really can kind of talk about is where in your life on a daily basis, even an hourly basis, just ask yourself, does this give me an increasing level of satisfaction and pleasure? Or does it just kind of keep me stuck where I'm at? Or does it take away from my satisfaction and pleasure? And you want to move away from the things that take away from your satisfaction and pleasure, and things that keep you stuck. Then you want to think, well, then what can I do to start making a shift in the things that I myself am doing actively in my life every day in order to increase the amount of satisfaction and pleasure I have in my life? You see, that's what I started to do and realize when I transitioned my monogamous marriage into non-monogamy. And that's also then what I went through a process of realizing that I wanted to have a liberated financial income where I'm not dependent on trading my time for money, and I'm not dependent upon, just having not the kind of money that I would like to have. And so the process for me becoming financially liberated is very much the same process for people that are going through a process of becoming sexually liberated in their relationships. And so that's where I started to make these videos and give you weekly updates because, yeah, it doesn't happen quickly. And if you followed my videos here, you've seen that, yes, I've made some mistakes and I've had to retrack and kind of go back to the starting point again and start over at one point, and so do some of those things as well. But that's where we come down to tonight's topic because, if you don't have a foundation of trust established in your relationships, and for me, that's my relationships with business. And for you, then, that's relationships with your partners and romantic relationships. And when I transitioned my marriage from monogamy to non-monogamy without having a really solid foundation of trust, is pretty tough to try to make a transition. And so that's what the importance of tonight's topic is. And I'm going to start out by then talking about your homework. And I am going to have weekly homework assignments here as we go through these week by week now. And the homework assignment for this next week is that if you are in a relationship with someone you regularly have sex with, or if you're in a long-term committed relationship with someone that you're not regularly having sex with, maybe you stopped having sex long ago, or you only have occasionally you have sex with a person. Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to sit down with that person, have two deep level conversations this week with that person based upon the material that I covered tonight. And so you want to take some notes as you go through this video and maybe even come back and watch it again and take yourself some notes so that you can have and prepare yourself for these conversations for the homework this week. Now, if you're not in a relationship, if you're just like totally single and a free agent, and don't have that kind of a situation where you're trying to transition your relationship that you already have with someone into a non-monogamous relationship, then take some notes on tonight's topic for yourself and think about how you want to apply this to live by this idea of establishing this foundation of trust in your relationships so that as you have these relationships that you start to get into, they start out as a foundation of trust, and it's in the sense of a sexual trust and a non-monogamous trust where then they aren't going to be resisting you in having the life that you want, which means that you're going to have more sex with more people more often and live a liberated life. And so that's the importance then of this conversation if you're single. And so how do we build trust? And I'm going to label this part one because I'm going to come back next week and do part two. And that's more focused on how to build trust in relationships. But tonight we're going to just talk in general terms about how to build trust, and that it could be trust in your relationships and sex life, or in my case, also building trust in my work and wealth. And like for instance, then some of the things that I have coming up that I'm very excited about with the work that I've been doing, and where I want to help people who live ethically and consensually non-monogamous lives to liberate themselves financially, just like I'm liberating myself financially. And it's kind of a selfish reason that I'm doing this. And then I would love to take and have a group, like, for instance, I went to a conference in Las Vegas. This is about 4 years ago, and it was a business conference. And the gentleman was somebody that I had paid a fair amount of money to be a mentor of mine for a year. Sometimes we make mistakes and choose the wrong mentors, and that's part of what I want to help to guide and help people with, so they don't make these kinds of mistakes. Because I was operating out there just on my own, and when I help work with you, your financial liberation, you're not going to be on your own. But so I went off to this conference, and and it was a room where there was probably about 100 people, 125 people in the room, or something like that. This guy, he had made several millions of dollars, and doing some of the same things that I kind of want to do. But the thing is that oftentimes, because I'm pretty, I don't hide who I am, and who I am is non-monogamous, Mark, and I don't hide that about myself. I don't hide that I'm non-monogamous, and the fact that there are 12 to 15 million people in the U.S. that are non-monogamous. In fact, I didn't hide it there. And sure enough, I had people coming up to me secretly, talking to me, like, because they don't want to like be outed or anything. And I remember what it was like to be in that kind of a place myself, and so but they came up and talked to me, and but for the most part, including the gentleman that I paid a lot of money to for a year, actually a year and a half, every single month to as a mentor. And I contracted to pay him for a year, and then once I found it very difficult to get that money to stop, and so he really got too much money from me. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But the thing is though, is that I don't know. He almost felt. I think he sometimes people feel when they get around someone like me, so that is not embarrassed or ashamed to be non-monogamous, and not as that lives my non-monogamous life being authentic. I think that they're afraid that, like, okay, this is not something that I really want to be talking about. My wife's here as well, and I don't want to put anything out there that I'm gonna have to talk to her about or anything like this. It's like they just get this weird vibe and the weird feeling. And so one of the things that I'd love to do is my goal is by 2025 is to help 1,000 ethically and consensually non-monogamous people to start on the path to where they have a life that is financially liberated, because they've already liberated themselves sexually. Let's go on to the next phase then, and that's liberate yourself financially. And so that when I go off to a conference like that, that we go in there, like if it's just a small event like that was in Las Vegas, 125 people, but I can go in there with 25 people that are ethically and consensually non-monogamous. We have our own contingency there, and just flirt and have a great time, and let everybody see how great of a time we have as ethically and consensually non-monogamous people. But then also, as I travel around, I'd love to take cruises with not right now, but after post COVID, I want to go on cruises. I want to travel around. I want to go on bicycling trips and train trips, and I want to do a lot of fun things. And I'd love to have a group of friends join me. And so that's where then I am working to build trust with my audience, whether I'm speaking to them through YouTube, or I'm also speaking to them in person, or through the emails that I send out on my email list, and a lot of different things that I am working to establish and build trust with people. And so let's then discuss then about this trust, you see, because trust is really a transaction that takes place between two or more people. And trust makes it possible for you to have a transaction. And that transaction goes like this. Can I trust that if I give you blank, I will get blank? Because sometimes we have a lot of uncertainty, but we go ahead and trust anyway, like I had done with that gentleman 4 years ago, and because he certainly had had a lot of success, and so I trusted that by giving him money for the time period of time that I did, that I would then get a lot of personal training from him, and after a couple months, he just kept repeating the same thing, and he ended up admitting. He says, "This is I just don't know what else to teach because this is what I do." And I didn't want to do exactly what he did, and I thought he had a lot more to teach. And so, at any rate, so there's always this transaction that takes place. When I went and discussed with my wife, we were monogamous, and we had for 20 at that point 25 years had sexual frustrations and difficulties, and and so I went and discussed with her about opening our marriage and for her to have sex with someone else and me have sex with someone else, and and so there was this transaction. Can I trust that if I give you blank, an open marriage, then I'll get blank? And it may be as simple as if I give you the ability to go out and have sex with someone else, then can I trust that I'll have that ability? Because you see, I know that my partner Kat, she dated someone about 5 years ago, and he had his wife had come home and started talking to him, and that there was a guy that was flirting with her that was she saw every day on her way to work, and she kind of thought that maybe it'd be fun to date this guy if he was open to dating her, being a married woman. And so this gentleman, worked it out with his wife. They had been monogamous, and he says sure. And then it took him about a month of conversation and what have you. And he says sure. And she started to date this guy. And but you see, then he stayed home taking care of the kids while she was out having fun. And so that went on for about 6 months, and she went and had lots of fun. And then it just didn't work out with that guy, and so she stopped having her fun. And when that happened, then he started talking to her. Well, maybe it's time for me to go out and have a date. Well, then she really came unglued, and she wasn't willing to let him go out and have his fun. And but after about 6 more months, then she says, "Okay, well maybe we can give it a try." And so he dated Kat, and when he came and dated Kat, then after their first date, then he went home and said how wonderful it was and everything. Wanted to have a second date with Kat, and the wife reluctantly then said okay, and so then he had a second date with Kat, which included sex, and then he went home, and because she had a lot of sex with the gentleman she dated. But then suddenly she starts pulling this thing. Well, I'm going to commit suicide over this, And I mean, she just went really crazy, and so that was a relationship where they really didn't have this foundation of trust. That can I trust that if I give you blank, if I give you permission and the ability to go out and date that guy, then I'll get the permission, I'll get the ability and the permission to go out and date a woman that I find attractive, that I'm wanting to date. And so there really wasn't this foundation of trust in their life. And so when you have that foundation established, then as other challenges come along through the process, because there can be a lot of challenges, whether it be jealousies and possessiveness and all the kinds of things, insecurities and things that can go on, that if there's a foundation of trust established, then you can usually work through those things. But without that foundation, it leaves you nowhere to go to try to work through those things. Now, when Chris and I first got met, that's my partner here in Seattle, when we got together, she knew that I was non-monogamous. She knew I was married at that time as well, and so we had a lot of trust established in our relationship right from the beginning, and we had this foundation, this rapport. And so sure enough, then when she had some hiccups, and that when I wanted to start going out and dating some other women, and she had this, really, because she had never been involved in a non-monogamous relationship before, but suddenly she felt like she was having these jealous, I mean, she called it the one-eyed monster or something like that. And she started having this like crazy jealousy, but because we had that foundation of trust established, it was something that she could bring to me, and we could talk about it, and we could work through it. And we worked through it, and I'm really proud that she did that. And so there's that transaction then that always takes place. Can I trust that if I give you, in this case, I was wanting to go out and date some other women. If I give you the opportunity to date other women, which she wasn't giving me permission or anything, but that I can be comfortable with that, well, then will I get your support in helping me to move through all this? And so there's always these transactions that take place. And so having an established trusting relationships enables you to make the transaction, be it a relationship for love or sex or employment or wealth creation, whatever that transaction and relationship is involved, but the trust is really where it all begins. And so going on, the next point here is that you want to weigh out the value of the transaction versus the value of the relationship. So in other words, that when I reached the point of in my monogamous marriage with my wife, that I mean, we were deeply involved in the church, and had been I had become very religious. I had moved away and out of a lot of that for a couple years before I then reached the place of discussing an open marriage with my wife. But still, I had a lot of roots there. My wife was still very involved in religion and our church life and all that, and so that I had to weigh out the value of the transaction. In other words, the value of me being able to have sex ethically and consensually, non-monogamously, with another woman. I had to weigh out the value of that with the value of the relationship. And after 25 years of my wife and I working on our sexual problems and frustrations and difficulties, after 25 years, I was at the point where I was willing to take and say, it's more important to me to have a satisfactory sexual experience for the rest of my life than it is to stay married and to stay in the relationship. So, in other words, I placed the value of that experience of having sex, an amazingly great sex with multiple people. I placed value on that to be a higher value than my relationship with my wife. Now, that's for some people, that's a difficult place to come to. But you see, because we're taught to not be selfish, and we're taught, to always put the other person first, and to put the relationship first, and to sacrifice ourselves. And I just wasn't willing to live the rest of my life continuing to do that. And so you need to weigh out the value of the transaction versus the value of the relationship. And in some cases, maybe then the value of the relationship is more than the value of what you could potentially gain. And so then you just end up staying stuck. But then ask yourself, going back to where we began this conversation, up here at the top, is this increasing the satisfaction and pleasure in your life? Or is it taking away from the satisfaction and pleasure in your life? And so if it's taken away from the satisfaction and pleasure, if it's just keeping you stuck and you're just not making forward progress, then it's time for some change. if you don't start making some change, then it's going to wear away at you like it did me. For me, my personality, I went from being a nice, kind-hearted, loving guy to being kind of a hard ass. And so my personality over time had shifted because of my sexual frustrations. In fact, as my wife got into where she really didn't find that she really liked me anymore. She said she still loved me. That was different than liking me. But I was no longer her really great buddy and friend because she didn't find that my personality was appealing anymore. And then after we opened our marriage, and that all changed because those things that caused that personality to become so bound up and to go through the changes that it had, then that was all gone. And I returned to being that really nice, loving, caring guy. And my wife noticed the change. And that was one of the things that turned her around and made her really start thinking that, this non-monogamous stuff is maybe something that would be something that I'd really be interested in trying myself. And so weigh out the value of the transaction. And the thing is that your relationships can be an asset to completing the transaction, or it can become a hindrance. And if it's going to be a hindrance, then believe me, it's better that you go ahead and I mean, I know we're taught in our society that divorce is such a terrible, awful thing, but it's not. And we're so attached to finances that we're willing to just fight and grab a hold of everything and be miserable in order to keep on a hold of monetary gain, when sometimes it's just better to walk away and let go of all that so that you can start to build your life and create the life for you to find all the satisfaction and pleasure that is awaiting for you in your life. So on to the next point then is, when you are willing to lose the relationship to have the transaction, you'll begin to move forward. Put yourself in an abundant playing field rather than the one that's based upon scarcity, limitations, restrictions, and unhealthy dependencies. That's what my wife in monogamy, my wife and I had created this as unhealthy dependency, where she was supposed to meet all my sexual needs, but she didn't like it and didn't want it. But we had this dependency going on. And of course, I was limited and restricted from, enjoying a sexual relationship at all because it wasn't enjoyable with her. And couldn't go out and find it with someone else because in our relationship being monogamous, there was scarcity involved. It could only be one. That's not abundance. And so that's when I went and decided it was time for some changes. And I was willing to risk losing the relationship in order to be able to have the transaction of what I wanted. And in my case, then, and if you have this trust, that's the importance of this. If you have this trust established in your relationship, then you can start to talk about these things. And so that's where the homework this week is: start talking about, maybe if you can't talk about having an open relationship or having sex with other people, start talking about the trust and establishing the foundation of trust. Now, next week, we're going to get into more about some specific points for you to talk about, but you can start the conversation this week. And so then you set the stage for living a liberated life through ongoing communication and conversations with your relationships that keep you headed in the direction of the liberated life that you want to live. So if you have that trust established, you can keep coming back to that trust. And for me and my wife, that was really what made this all possible. I kept coming back to two things: the trust that we had and the love that we had. And so kept coming back to that. And, and then I would say, well, really, are you willing to throw away a 25-year, and at that point it was 26-year marriage because I would like to enjoy myself sexually, which means then that maybe I should try having sex with someone besides you because it's not been enjoyable with us and we've worked on this. And so, and for some of you, you're not that, you don't have that situation going on at all. You have the situation where you have a great sex life with your partner, and your partner then could come back and say, well, but what's wrong with me? Why are you just unfulfilled with me? I mean, this was part of what then Chris and I went through when Chris and I started to date. And then I had two other girlfriends and then my wife. So she was one of four relationships. I knew one of those girlfriends was going to be moving. And so then she'd be down to one of three relationships. And then ended up over time just kind of phasing out of another relationship that I had, which Chris actually became friends with that woman. And so I phased out of that relationship, and so then it was just Chris and my wife that I was having a relationship with. And and it's kind of like, yeah, I still wanted to be able to have a little more variety in my relationships. I find that there's a richness to having not only the sex in a relationship that I can have, but a richness in the relationship itself. And every relationship I have brings out different parts of me and different things in me. And I like that part of what happens. So for some people, they don't want a relationship, they just want the sex. And that's okay too. That's kind of the difference between somebody who's in a polyamorous life and a swingers life. And then there's those who would blend things, and there's all kinds of different combinations that take place here. And so it was just Chris and my wife and me, and I said, yeah, I want to go out and start dating again. And apparently I got Alexa going on in the background. Alexa, quiet, off. Alexa, off. Okay, there we go. And so there's just this richness I find in having multiple relationships, and so when I talked to Chris and told her this is, yeah, I'm going to start dating another gal. Hadn't met anybody, hadn't really started looking yet, but I wanted to work that out with her before that, so she knew that, and we started talking and working our way through that. And then when I started to date someone, then she had all these feelings of insecurity and jealousy and stuff that come up, and we're able to then to work our way through that. And it's because we had that foundation trust. And so I put myself in an abundant playing field rather than one based upon scarcity, limitations, restrictions, and unhealthy dependencies. And I set my own stage for living a liberated life. And I set the stage, I set the atmosphere for living a liberated life, and I do that through ongoing communication. It was ongoing communication with Chris, ongoing communication with my wife. My wife is not in my life anymore. In fact, she's no longer living, and so, but with Kat and Chris, and if I have any other relationships in my life, it's always this ongoing communication and conversations that I keep going with, so that it establishes the stage in my relationships. In fact, that's where Chris and I have been talking, and I just released a video last night, or no, yeah, put it up last night, and because Chris and I have been talking about, I want her to have more satisfaction and more pleasure in her life, which she struggles with me being in California and away as much as I am, and so we were out and go and check on that video. About 2/3 of the way into the video, we're sitting there on this bench in this beautiful park, and talking and making this video, and she says, well, in fact is, I've got someone I'm going to be spending some time with in the next couple months. And so that was news to me, but actually I believe it's the guy that she actually um, kind of blossomed into her sexuality with. And that he was the first person that she ever had sex with, and he then they ended up living together, And so anyway, they've been friends for many years, obviously, and maintain that friendship. And he's moving back into this area at least part of the time, and they're going to get a chance to see each other. Oh, she says he was not her first. Oh, okay. He was a 42-year one-night stand. Okay. And so, but by keeping this ongoing conversation and communication going, then we're able to take and make some shifts and changes in our relationship so that we can keep working into having more satisfaction and more pleasure in our life, not only for ourselves, but for the people that we love as well. Because I certainly don't want Chris to end up being stuck where then she's not having the satisfaction and pleasure that she deserves to have in her life because I'm off, spending time somewhere else. And so you need to keep these conversations and this communication going. And that really helps to then create that liberated life and set the stage for yourself. The other way is to live a life that's based upon fear or negativity. And so I've been there myself and lived that life for too long. And how I learned to start liberating my life. And it was so liberating to step over that line or step over that wall and to the positive side of life and changing my perspective and my outlook and my life and realize that, yes, I can have more satisfaction. I can have more pleasure in my life. And I want that for you as well. Now, when it comes to back to trust or comes back to that relationship, the stronger the relationship, the stronger the trust. And that's really a two-way street here. The stronger the trust, the stronger the relationship. The stronger the relationship, the stronger the trust. And so, if you don't have that kind of strength in the relationship that you have, then my question is, why do you struggle to keep it going? I know maybe it's kids, or maybe it's if you're afraid what people will think if you get divorced. You're going to have to, maybe the relationships that you have with friends and family and relatives and everything else. I mean, when one of the things when Kat went and told her husband that she was going to divorce him, even her parents were against her at first. And they finally, after a while, then they came around and saw things from her standpoint. And so it's weird what goes on sometimes. But the thing is she had to live her life, and you have to live your life. And so that means that a divorce is going to need to take place. Don't be afraid of it, but approach it not from fear, but approach it from the positive side of life. And that may take before you start to move into that possible change in your relationship, where you have to start first working on, and this is why we call our three-part process: reframe, and then to transition or transform, kind of the same thing, and then you get to liberate. And so you may be some reframing that needs to be going on with yourself. And that is where you change some of your perspective, change your outlook and your life. Certainly that took place for me, coming from my religious past and the place where, oh my God, I was afraid that what would anybody think if they found out I was having sex with someone besides my wife, or what would they think that of me if they found out that I went to talk to my wife about having sex with someone else, you know, and the thing is that you can't let those kinds of thoughts that keep you from the satisfaction and pleasure you want to enjoy in your life. And so that's where there's this reframing that goes on, where you change your perspective, you change your outlook, and you change your life. So the stronger the relationship, the stronger the trust. You've got to establish that. And if you don't have that established, then have these conversations starting this week to see if you can establish that. Because just because it's not there, it doesn't mean that you can't establish that foundation. You can go back there and you can, it's like pour some new concrete on it, and establish that foundation. Now, if you find that foundation just can't be established, I'm sorry, but there's some red flags going off, some bells going off, ding, 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 saying it's time. It's time. You're going to be miserable if you don't start making some changes. So if you do have enough trust built up to overcome the risk and uncertainty, no matter how much you offer to give, if you don't have that trust, no matter how much you offer to give, it's unlikely that you'll ever get what you want, which is an indication of it being time to end the relationship, because otherwise you're just creating a life for yourself that is not full of satisfaction and not full of pleasure. And it's taken away, it's a life that takes away from your satisfaction, takes away from your pleasure. And so maybe, yes, maybe there's some real thoughts that need to go through and work on this. Like if there's kids involved, and how we're going to approach this with the kids so that it keeps everything on the positive side of life. But this is where it starts with you. Working on your own perspective, your own outlook, and in your own life. And that's what we call reframing, and then transforming, and then liberating. Now, another thing that's important here I learned along the way in my non-monogamous life is to understand the hierarchy of needs that people have that you're working with. So like if whether it be a business transaction or whether it be, like for instance, a good example is today. I went today and had some new brakes put on my car, and I fortunately, here in Burien, I don't have a mechanic anymore that I'm working with, and so I went to looking for a mechanic, and I went and checked with a couple different garages in town and automotive shops, and then I really settled on one that the guy just gave me what I felt was a fair shake. I mean, I didn't know that necessarily at first, but it turned out that the guy just really gave me a fair shake. Now, all this came about because before I left California, I went into a shop. My brakes had just started to squeal, and so I went into the shop because I don't want to drive to Seattle and some over 1,000 miles and on bad brakes. And so I went into a shop, and the guy comes back, and he says, "Oh yeah, you're down to zero, and you're going to have to replace the drums and all this." And the bill with tax is going to be over $500. And I thought, that seems like a lot of money, and maybe I'd do better in Seattle, and gosh, that seems like a lot of money. I'd never paid that much for a brake job before, and I thought, well, because I'm stopping fine. It's not like I have soft brakes or have a hard time stopping. I'm stopping just fine. And so I figured, well, if what he says is true, then everything's shot already. I can't do any more damage. And so I just figured I would drive up then to Seattle, and up here while I'm in Seattle, then I'll get my brakes taken care of. And sure enough, then I went in the shop to get them taken care of today, and with the sales tax, the bill came out to just $204 instead of over $500. And you see the difference is that this guy says, no, you don't need all that stuff. And I had already knew I'd gotten an idea that this was a dishonest shop in California, and I'm going to report them when I get back. And because they doing some really shoddy stuff. But you see, at first when I went there, there was that idea that I need to have this done, but they didn't have enough trust established with me. For me, the value of the money I was going to spend was more for me to go out and get some other garages to take a look. And so there's this hierarchy of needs. And years ago, in a relationship that I had, the woman it was in a year-long relationship with this woman. I was deeply in love with her, and she was deeply in love with me, and the sex was just amazing. But then her hierarchy of needs for the social circle that she ran in, she needed to be able to take and introduce me as her husband and know that she had the marriage license. And that was really important to her. That was her hierarchy. That was more important to her than love, than have a deeply loving relationship. That was more important to her than crazy good sex. Just like there's a lot of gals out there right now that look for sugar daddies. and for them, the money, it's about, can this guy really give me the life financially that I want? And if he can, then I'm happy to give him crazy good sex and to love on him and all this kind of stuff. And so there's these different hierarchies of need. And for this woman, her hierarchy of need to be married was much higher than, or maybe, at least it was higher than her need for a great, loving, and sexually dynamite relationship. And so a guy came along and asked her to marry him and would not accept her to have a lover because she asked him, can I have my lover? And he said, no, it's going to be totally you and me, and that's it. And so she said, can I have a month to think about it? And he said, I'll give you 1 month. And then she went through this process, and we talked about it. And she ended up saying, yeah, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and marry this guy. And that's where I understood then she had this need to be Mrs. and have his last name and all of these things that kind of will roll along with that marriage license and all that, and the social structure that she was in. And so it's important to have an understanding then of the hierarchy of needs when you're dealing with it, be in business situations that I'm dealing with now, or in financial dealings, or whether it be in a romantic and sexual relationship. So when you sit down and have that conversation this week, then have that conversation about really learning what's important, what's your hierarchy of needs. Now, this is one of the things that became very clear with my transition from non-monogamy into monogamy, and excuse me, from monogamy into non-monogamy with my monogamous wife, and then transitioning into a non-monogamous life together, was is to really find out what her needs were. And so as we started working through the process in our relationship, she had a need to be put number one. And so then, and the transaction went like this: Mark, if I take and let you have sex with other women, will you make sure that I remain queen amongst all the women that might become in your life? And so that was the transaction. And she had to have enough trust in me to be able to know that if I said yes, I'll agree to that. And so we put all kinds of rules in place for our relationship. Now today I teach some different ways when I'm doing my coaching and my teachings and things that I do. I teach different ways to do these things than to deal with all the rules, because really what the rules did, instead of really sitting down and talking further, digging deeper into her need of realizing why is she so insecure, and seeing if there's opportunities for her to be able to grow and blossom as a human being. And instead, we fed that weakness in her. And so now I don't really recommend feeding someone else's weakness, but instead help them with their weakness. Just like with me and Chris, I didn't feed into her jealousy. I instead helped her to work through it. And it wasn't always easy. It wasn't always pleasant, but it was something that was worth for both of us to work through that process. And so with my wife, though, that yeah, that just wasn't happening. She had all these insecurities and stuff. So we put these rules in place, And like another rule that we had is that any information that, like, one time I went off to a doctor's appointment, and right after as I came out of the doctor's appointment, my girlfriend called, and so I gave her the news of what the doctor told me. Well, that was really my wife. She complained about that because I'm supposed to tell her, because she's queen bee, remember. And so I'm supposed to tell her first all these things. Not supposed to tell anybody else before I tell her these important things. And so there again, then it really fed into her insecurities. But that's where you find out what the hierarchy of needs is, but then dig a little deeper sometimes. Like if I knew then what I know now, I would have dug deeper into my wife's hierarchy of needs and seeing if we couldn't create some opportunities for her to grow through and become a better person herself. And so, with all that, then I'm going to go ahead and end this conversation on building trust. And next week, then I'm going to come back with part 2 on building trust, specifically on how to do it in your relationship and how I do it in the relationships I have, whether that be in business or my romantic relationships. So we're going to come back and visit that next week. So look forward to that. Well, let's go ahead and get on to the weekly report so we can close out this week's weekly wrap-up video report. And so again, then every week, as the reason I do this is that I'm wanting to be transparent and kind of showing you what I'm going through week by week in my transformation and in my also reframing that I'm going through, you know, and so I want you to use the same structure, or I should say, you can steal it from me. Use the same structure that I use here. I encourage it. Steal it from me. And so that structure starts with then having your overriding desire written down. Don't just have it on your head, but write it down, because there's some extra power and energy that comes along when you write something down than if you just keep it in your head. And you might do that like I keep it on a computer file. But so I have got 3 overriding desires, and I don't recommend really having more than 3, but 1 or 2 is great. 3 is the maximum. And so my 3 overriding desires is to create an ongoing online passive income of $5,000 per month from having 5 e-commerce stores. And so then the second item is to create an online non-monogamous lifestyles academy with 1,000 free members and 200 paid members. And that we're going to have, things we're going to offer for free to anybody who wants to be part of the academy. And then for people who want to pay and help us actually support us, we want to take and give them added value and give them reasons why then they would want to take and maybe pay a little bit of money every month to be part of that. And then the third thing on my overriding desire is to create an ethically and consensually non-monogamous financial liberation club with 1,000 free members and 200 paid members. And started out talking about what I want to do and helping you and others become financially liberated, and go through some things that I'm learning now. But the only thing, because basically all that I have learned in the last several years, then you're going to be able to do this much more efficiently and much quicker, so much better than what I have done myself. And I'm very excited that and to be able to help 1,000 people by 2025 to do that and get started in that process. Okay, so then what was my focus then for last week? There's 3 things I every week focus on, and last week was finish my court hearing. It was one of them. Now these 3 focuses, that they're based on keeping my needle moving forward and making progress every week. They're not just progress that's doing things that aren't going to really make a difference, but keep making progress on things that are going to make a big difference in those overriding desires that you have for your life. And so right now, those overriding desires, if you're not living ethically and consensually non-monogamous life, I hope that your overriding desire is to live an ethically and consensually non-monogamous life. Maybe you're cheating, or maybe you're just like I was and just suffering sexually and miserable and wanting to make some changes in your monogamous relation. Or maybe you're single and you're just miserable sexually, playing this singleness thing, and it's nothing wrong with being single. I mean, you may want to stay single, but live an ethically and consensually non-monogamous life. And so you figure out what your overriding desire is. Last week, then, one of my first thing was to finish my court hearing, and I successfully. And so I give myself a pass or fail on each one of these, and I give myself a pass on that. The second thing is to get my bus sold. My bus is my RV, my motorhome, 35-foot Greyhound bus that was converted into a motorhome, and yes, I got that sold. I no longer have any responsibility or obligation with that, and very excited about that. And very excited for the person I sold it to, because he is going to just do some wonderful things in restoring this bus and making it just even better than probably what when I bought it, in great shape. The next thing is to clean off, to get my desk cleaned off, and so that would be so that it's cleared off, and Chris can have that for using, because she's a remote worker working from home now, and she's going to not be returning ever to the working from an office again, and it's something that she's actually wanted for a couple of years, and so she's very excited about that. And but with this whole COVID thing, their company is kind of made it mandatory for everybody. And then they said, "Oh, this working out so good, let's close some offices." And you're going to see a really major commercial real estate market crash, as we go into the next months and years, the next 2 years. So commercial real estate market, from malls to office buildings, it's going to crash in a big way. And but anyway, so she, instead of using the dining room table to have as her workspace, then I've got a really nice desk that's a nice roll top desk, and I just need to get that cleared off for her. And I did not get it completed. I got it worked on, but I'm going to continue to get that worked on and so I can get that completed this week then. But what are my accomplishments? So for last week. What did I do to keep my needle moving forward? As I mentioned, I sold the bus, and that just frees up so much of my time. I mean, that's taken like probably at least 50% of my time working on that this month, and or not this month, not October, but in the month of September. Took in September, it took a big chunk of my time working on. And even before then, it didn't take my time every month because I just had it parked here in Seattle. But being parked here in Seattle, I had to pay rent for that RV space every month, and that cost me. Which then, I had to make that money to pay that RV rent, and that took time. And so, getting that bustle was a big accomplishment. And then getting through the court hearing. This was, my grandparents died, and so taking care of their estate, and my sister got greedy along the way, and I'm going to be talking more about this another time, another video, when I talk about the topic of living your life, to be, instead of always for other people, but live your life to maybe be a little more on the selfish side. And so I'll be talking more about that later, but with my sister and all involvement with this, and she got greedy, but it's just so good to have that hearing now. I mean, the estate is being closed out, and so it's been a process with my sister for the last 2 years, and a longer process for myself, being involved with this as well. But with this, then I'm very excited that last week, then I got my sister completely out of my life for good. And this is sometimes then what has to be done. Then we have these toxic people that are like leeches on our life. And my sister is my older sister, and the only sister I have left. And my younger sister died years ago, but she's all my life. And she's not only been like a leech out of my life, as she was a leech on my grandparents. And I just don't even want to go on all the family dynamics. And some of you probably have some of your own family dynamics with things like this. But so with this whole process being behind me now, I decided that I'm just going to close the book on my sister and walk out of her life, and probably never see her or never talk to her again for the rest of my life. And I am really, really happy about that. And there again, this is where the reframing process comes along. Is that sometimes there's reframing that has to take place in order for you to be able to take the transitions necessary to liberate your life, so that you can live a life that is full of satisfaction and pleasure, instead of having things in your life always take away from the satisfaction and pleasure you have in your life. And sometimes these things don't happen. These transitions don't happen quickly. And that's why we're in week 20 here of me transitioning my income. And if we're going through, if this is 13 years ago and I'm doing this weekly update, in fact, would have started 15 years ago, transitioning my marriage from monogamy to non-monogamy, then, that would have been a 2-year process as well. So sometimes that these things just take and move slowly, but you got to keep those steps going forward. And part of that process is the reframing in your own self, and then the transition that you have to go through, and then you can enjoy and experience the liberation. So last week, then another accomplishment is I began building a website for some really cool free tools that I have to give away, and I'm going to be telling you more about this in the next couple of weeks after I complete the website. I'm new at building websites. I've not really built many sites before myself. In fact, my first site I ever really worked on was the site that I'm building for my e-commerce store, and it's really kind of a platform that the site itself is built for me, and for the most part, and that this e-commerce platform that I purchased, and so that's not building a site from scratch. And so this site now that I'm building is really the first time I've ever built a website from scratch. And I'm building this website to be able to give away some free tools that I have that are going to be a really great to offer you. I'm excited to tell you more about those in the weeks to come. I went on a beautiful fall outing with Chris, and I made a video on that. We made a video together, and so I posted it last night. I encourage you to go and take a look at that. And again, you'll see Chris drop a kind of a surprise on me as well, about 2/3 the way into the video, and it was a pleasant surprise, and so that was a great thing. But just that beautiful fall outing that we went on was to a place where is the largest gathering of bald eagles in the continental United States, and a place here in Washington. The bald eagles weren't there. They come down starting at about the end of October or the 1st of November, and then they're here for 4 to 5 months every year. They come down from Alaska, but it's the largest gathering of place where bald eagles gather in the continental United States. And so won't be able to show that to you, but so nonetheless, it's just a beautiful place. So enjoy watching that video that I put on my YouTube channel. And then that's where then I edited and posted the video, because I've got videos that I have quite over the last well, this whole year I've made videos that I just haven't gotten edited and posted. Times are wrapped up doing other things, and so I just took the time and made the time to go ahead and get that video edited and posted, because it's so timely, and so that was an accomplishment then. What are the bottlenecks and breakdowns and breakthroughs then for me? And that is that I learned last week a lot about the cost of not living my life selfishly. And like I said, I'm going to be coming back and doing a whole session on this and in the future. And because, yes, there's a cost involved to not living your life selfishly. But, we're all taught not to be selfish. That's just nonsense. That's really crazy. Because anything that's ever been accomplished, any progress that's ever made in this world that I can think of has come from some element of selfishness. Even the fact that you get up and go to work for a paycheck, you do that for your selfish pursuit of that paycheck and the benefits that you have along with that. You don't do it out of the goodness of your heart. Very few people would go to work every day, day after day, for free. If you had $500 million dropped in your lap tomorrow, would you get up and continue going to work? Maybe for a couple months, because you don't want to leave anybody high and dry and all that, but you'd find your ways, some way to start easing out of things and change your life and do things differently. And so, I learned a lot about the cost of not being selfish last week, and so that was my breakthrough. Now, going on to this next week, then, there are 3 things that I'm wanting to accomplish this week, and I'll be back next Monday night to report to you on that. And the first thing is getting my desk cleaned off. And the second thing is that I've got tubs here in Chris's apartment and that are stacked around, and these are like, big storage tubs, about, 1.5 feet deep and 2.5 feet long and 14 inches wide and things like that. And I need to get my stuff kind of cleared out and emptied out and go through those things. Um, so I'm going to get that done here. And then lastly, I'm going to drive to California this week. I prefer to, instead of driving straight through or driving, and I prefer to take 3 days and just enjoy the trip, stop and take some hikes along the way and stuff like that, and have some fun with it. I mean, that's part of the elf life: easy, liberated, and fun. And so I want to be able to have that easy, liberated, fun life and not feel like that, oh, I've got to just drive straight on through and get down there to California. No, I want to stop and have some fun along the way. And so that's going to then be one of my things I'm working to accomplish this week, is to take that and get that 3-day drive in and get on to California sometime this week. And so I'll be reporting on all of that next Monday then. So thank you very much for spending this time with me here tonight. Give the video a like, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. We've got a couple new subscribers this past week. I welcome you and thank you for subscribing. And go ahead and subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. If you have any comments or questions, please post them in the comments and questions. I do read every single one, and I'll make sure to answer any questions that you have. And so I appreciate your being here and spending this time with me. And let me just go here and switch my screen real quick to take a look to see if there's any comments in the comments that have been posted, and there are not. And so I do see that there's some people here, though, and I thank you for being with me, and I'll see you again then next week. Good night.